The first time I walked into that bar, I wasn't expecting anything more than a drink to help me wind down. The week had worn me thin. Late nights, early mornings, the same tired rhythm on repeat. The kind of fatigue that makes you crave a place where no one asks much of you. It was late evening, and the place had already settled into its rhythm. Soft golden light hung overhead, bouncing off polished wood and half-empty glasses. A jukebox in the corner played something slow, the sound mixing with a low hum of conversations and bursts of laughter from clustered tables. It was lively but not overwhelming, a perfect sort of in-between. I slipped onto a stool at the bar, the leather seat creaking slightly under my weight. I didn't even notice her at first, not until her voice cut through the haze. "What can I get you tonight?" I looked up, and there she was, leaning casually behind the counter, a bar towel draped over her shoulder, her presence both sharp and soft at once. She couldn't have been much older than 40, but there was something about her that made her stand out instantly. Long dark hair, tied loosely at the back, a few strands falling free around her face. Her skin was lightly tanned, with faint freckles across her cheeks, the kind you only notice when the light catches them just right. There were soft laugh lines at the corners of her dark eyes, but instead of aging her, they only made her beauty more grounded, more human. She wasn't just attractive, she was magnetic. I ordered a whiskey, and she poured it with practiced ease, her movements fluid, unhurried. She didn't look down at her hands the way a younger bartender might. Instead, her eyes stayed on me, steady but not invasive, as though she was already gauging something about me that I hadn't said aloud. When she set the glass down, she gave me the faintest smile, small, knowing, almost like she'd been expecting me. The kind of smile that doesn't just greet you, but lingers in the back of your mind long after. I lifted the glass, taking a slow sip, though truthfully, I was more focused on her than the drink. She moved down the bar to serve another customer, and yet my eyes followed unconsciously. The way she carried herself, shoulders back, posture straight, yet with a looseness that came from confidence, made the entire space feel different. She didn't dominate the room, but she didn't need to. People leaned toward her naturally, pulled in by the gravity of her quiet presence. For the first time all week, I felt myself begin to unwind. Not because of the whiskey, not because of the music, but because of the woman behind the bar. I hadn't come looking for anything, not even conversation. But the moment our eyes met again, just briefly across the counter, I felt it, that subtle shift, the spark of curiosity. And somewhere deep down, I already knew this night would be different. The first sip of whiskey had barely settled when she returned, drying her hands with the towel that lived over her shoulder. The bar wasn't quiet exactly, but around me it felt like a bubble of calm had formed. Just her voice, the muted clinking of glass, and the faint chords of some old blues tune coming from the jukebox. "You look like you've had one of those weeks," she said, her tone light, but her eyes sharp, as though she could see further than most people. I gave a small laugh, more out of surprise than agreement. "Something like that." She leaned her elbows onto the polished counter, narrowing the space between us. The gesture felt casual, but the effect wasn't. The low light caught the strands of hair that had slipped from her tie, brushing against her cheek. She didn't look like she was trying to impress anyone. She looked like herself, and somehow, that made her impossible not to notice. "Tell me," she said, tilting her head slightly, "what keeps a young guy like you out here on a Friday instead of wherever you're supposed to be?" I smirked into my glass. Maybe this is where I'm supposed to be. That earned me the smallest lift of her brow, a flash of amusement passing through her dark eyes. Then she laughed, not loud, not forced, but a sound that felt warm enough to settle under my skin. She rested her chin in her hand, her smile still lingering. For a while we just talked, not about anything heavy at first. She asked about the kind of music I liked, and I asked how long she'd been tending this bar. "Too long, some nights," she said, though there was a softness in her voice that told me she cared about this place, even if she pretended otherwise. She spoke about music again, how it kept her company when the nights stretched too long and quiet. She admitted she used to sing once, years back, but her expression clouded as if she'd revealed more than she intended. I leaned in, caught by the vulnerability in her tone, but she shifted quickly, returning to her steady composure. It struck me how easily she seemed to balance herself. Open but guarded, playful but serious. Like she knew the weight of life too well, but refused to let it dim her warmth. As she talked, I noticed things that weren't in her words. The faint lines that deepened when she laughed, the curve of her hand as it rested against the wood, the way her dark eyes softened when she listened. She wasn't just serving drinks. She was anchoring people, making the noise of the world fade, if only for a little while. I didn't realize how long we'd been speaking until the music changed and half the room had turned over. The drink in front of me was gone, and still, I wasn't ready to leave. Not because of the whiskey. Because of her. The second glass came without me asking. She slid it across the polished oak counter with practiced ease, but this time, she didn't withdraw her hand. Instead, her fingers lingered, resting lightly on top of mine, as though it was the most natural thing in the world. It was a simple gesture, one that could be explained away as casual, but it wasn't. Not with the way her touch settled. Warmth spread across my skin, quiet but undeniable, as though her hand carried some unspoken message she wasn't ready to put into words. My first instinct was to pull back, out of surprise, maybe even respect, but I didn't. I couldn't. Something in the steadiness of her gaze kept me anchored. She didn't flinch or look away. Her dark eyes held mine with a softness that suggested both curiosity and restraint, as if she was testing not only me, but herself. The faintest smile touched the corner of her lips, the kind of smile that wasn't meant for customers or even for strangers. It was personal, layered with something she didn't name. For a moment, the noise of the bar fell away. No laughter, no clinking glasses, no footsteps across the wooden floor. Just the hum of the jukebox in the background and the weight of her hand resting over mine. It wasn't heavy, but it was certain, like she wanted me to notice, like she wanted me to remember. I studied the details I might have overlooked before. The faint freckles scattered over her lightly tanned skin. The way her hair, long and black, slipped from behind her ear and framed her face in soft, imperfect strands. The laugh lines that deepened faintly when she smiled, a mark of years lived fully. She didn't look at all uncertain, but I could feel the tension under her calm, as though she knew the line we were skirting wasn't one most people would approve of. I let my thumb shift just slightly, brushing against her knuckle. The smallest motion, but it carried the weight of a choice. She noticed. I could see it in the way her breath caught, her chest rising a fraction higher. Yet she didn't move her hand away. If anything, her fingers pressed a little firmer, grounding the connection. "Careful," she said quietly, her voice low enough that it was for me alone. "You might get used to this place." Her words were meant to be teasing, but her tone betrayed something deeper. She was warning herself as much as me. Still, the warmth in her eyes made it clear. She didn't really want to let go. The bar around us bustled on, patrons ordering, laughter carrying through the air. But here, at this little stretch of counter, the world slowed. What should have been nothing, a casual brush of hands, had turned into a spark that neither of us could ignore. Her hand remained a moment longer before she finally pulled back, but the imprint of her touch stayed, a quiet reminder that something had just shifted between us. Something fragile and dangerous and impossible to forget. That it was later in the night when the bar began to thin out. The usual noise, laughter, clinking glasses, the jukebox humming in the background, softened into a quieter rhythm. She moved gracefully between the last few customers, refilling drinks, wiping down counters, always with that same calm efficiency. But every so often, her eyes found mine, lingering a beat too long before darting away. When the last group finally stepped out into the cool night air, she pulled the chain on the door, locking it behind them. The neon "open" sign flickered off, leaving only the warm amber glow of the bar lights. I should have left then too, but something in the way she glanced back over her shoulder, hesitant, as if weighing whether to speak, kept me in my seat. "You don't have to rush out," she said, tossing her keys onto the counter. Her tone was casual, but the undercurrent wasn't. I nodded, gripping my glass though it was nearly empty. Didn't think you'd want company after hours. She smirked faintly, then let out a breath. Most nights I don't. Tonight feels different. Those words settled heavily between us. She slipped out from behind the counter, surprising me. Without the barrier of wood and bottles between us, she looked different, more real, less untouchable. Her black hair, slightly loosened from the long shift, brushed over her shoulders. Her blouse, simple, white, with sleeves rolled to her elbows, had a softness that matched her tired but still steady posture. She gestured to a booth in the corner. "Sit with me." I followed, my pulse uneven as I slid into the cushioned seat across from her. The booth light glowed gently above us, washing her face in warm tones. For the first time that night, she seemed less like the confident bartender everyone else saw and more like a woman who'd carried a long day and was finally willing to put down. We talked quieter now, voices low as though the silence around us demanded respect. She asked about school, about work, about what I wanted out of the next few years. Not in a nosy way, but with genuine curiosity. I told her things I didn't expect to say out loud, how I wasn't sure what I was chasing, how sometimes I felt too young and too old at once. She listened, her dark eyes soft, her fingers curled loosely around her glass. Then, slowly, she shared pieces of herself. How the bar wasn't just a job, but a refuge. How she'd started over more times than she cared to admit. There was a weariness in her words, but also resilience. She wasn't trying to impress me. She was simply being honest. At one point, without thinking, I reached across the table. My hand brushed against hers where it rested. She didn't pull away. Instead, her fingers stilled under mine, warm and steady, her gaze meeting mine with a quiet intensity. "Careful," she said again, though softer this time, almost like a whisper meant for herself. But her hand stayed where it was. The heaviness of our earlier words needed release, and it came in the form of laughter, unexpected, warm, and almost startling in how easy it felt. She was telling me about a customer who once tried to pay with a scratch-off lottery ticket, miming his drunken sincerity, and I couldn't help but burst out laughing. The sound filled the empty bar, echoing off the wood and glass like it belonged there. She laughed too, her head tipping back slightly, her hand covering her mouth for just a second before she let it fall away. Her eyes lit up, the kind of laughter that reaches deep and makes the years fall off. For that moment, she wasn't the composed bartender, nor the woman with carefully measured boundaries. She was simply herself, alive, unguarded, radiant. I leaned forward, elbows on the table, grinning like an idiot. "You're going to ruin me. I'll never be able to sit in a bar again without waiting for someone to pay with a lottery ticket." She smirked, nudging my glass with her finger. "Then I'll take the credit, or the blame." Something about the way she said it, the playful spark under the words, pull me closer. We weren't just talking anymore. We were circling each other, drawing nearer with every shared smile and teasing glance. At one point, I noticed a strand of her long black hair had fallen forward, brushing against the table. Without really thinking, I reached out gently and tucked it back behind her ear. My fingers lingered just a fraction longer than necessary, grazing her temple, and I felt the warmth of her skin. She froze, her eyes searching mine, and for a heartbeat the laughter faded into silence. Her expression softened, the faintest crease at the corner of her lips, as though she was fighting between retreating and leaning closer. Instead, she broke the tension with a soft chuckle, shaking her head slightly. "You're too young to know how dangerous that move is." "Maybe," I said, my voice lower now. "Or maybe I just know what I want." Her eyes lingered on me, full of conflict yet unwilling to let go of the closeness that had formed. She lifted her glass and took a slow sip, her hand steady, though I could see the way her chest rose more deeply as she set it back down. We stayed like that for a while, trading stories, teasing remarks, and moments of quiet in which words weren't necessary. I found myself memorizing details. The curve of her smile when she was amused, the softness in her eyes when she listened, the faint laugh lines that deepened when she tried to hide a grin. At one point, she reached across the table again, not to make a point, not to emphasize a story, but simply to place her hand over mine. It wasn't dramatic. It was steady, sure grounding. And in that touch, in that simple act of closeness, I felt something shift. The air between us grew charged, fragile, but undeniable. We weren't laughing anymore, but the warmth of those moments lingered, carrying us quietly towards something deeper. The night had grown still, the outside world hidden beyond the locked doors and dim windows. Inside, only the soft glow of the booth light above us remained, casting her features in a golden warmth that made her look both timeless and achingly real. The hum of the refrigerator behind the bar was the only sound breaking the silence, and even it seemed distant, like it belonged to another place. Her hand remained over mine on the table, steady and sure. Neither of us spoke at first. We just sat there, eyes locked, letting the quiet draw us deeper into whatever this was becoming. I could feel my pulse beating under her touch, not frantic but insistent, as if reminding me that I was alive in a way I hadn't felt for a long time. She let out a slow breath, her lips parting as if to say something, but the words never came. Instead, she gave a faint shake of her head, the kind that wasn't a refusal so much as an admission. She was conflicted, standing at the edge of a line she hadn't meant to cross. Yet her hand never moved away. I shifted slightly closer, the booth narrowing the space between us until I could catch the faint scent of her perfume, something subtle, warm, almost like vanilla laced with cedar. It lingered in the air, pulling me toward her. "You make this hard," she whispered finally, her voice low and careful. "Maybe it's not supposed to be easy," I replied, my tone just as quiet, carrying the weight of honesty. Her eyes softened, searching mine, and for the first time I saw the vulnerability hidden beneath her composure. She wasn't just the confident woman behind the bar anymore. She was someone who had lived, lost, hoped, and still carried those pieces with grace. That realization made me want to reach for her, not just out of desire, but out of something deeper, something that felt like recognition. I moved my hand beneath hers, turning it so our palms touched, fingers curling slowly together. She didn't resist. Her fingers slid into mine, a subtle intertwining that felt more intimate than anything else we could have done in that moment. The warmth of her skin against mine was steady, grounding, but it carried an electricity that made my chest tighten. Her eyes flicked to my lips for the briefest moment before darting away, as though she had betrayed a thought she wasn't supposed to entertain. She gave a small, nervous laugh, rare for her, I could tell, and then shook her head again. "You're too young," she murmured, but there was no conviction in her voice. It was as though she was repeating a rule she no longer believed in. "Then stop holding my hand," I said softly. She didn't. Instead, her thumb brushed against my skin, a slow, delicate movement that sent a shiver through me. It was such a small thing, but in the stillness of that booth, it carried the weight of a confession neither of us had spoken aloud. The space between us felt impossibly fragile, heavy with the tension of words unspoken and choices hovering on the edge. Neither of us leaned in, but both of us wanted to. The restraint was agonizing, but it was also beautiful, a reminder that some connections didn't need to be rushed to be real. For a long moment, we just sat there, two people caught in the quiet storm of wanting, resisting, and not letting go. The clock above the bar ticked past midnight, though neither of us seemed to notice. Time had slipped out the door with the last customer, leaving just the two of us in a world that felt smaller, quieter, and infinitely more alive. Her hand was still in mine, fingers loosely entwined, and though we hadn't crossed that invisible line we both knew existed, it felt as though we already had. At last, she leaned back against the booth, her shoulders easing into the worn cushion. She didn't pull away, but her eyes softened, as though she had made some decision within herself. "You should know," she said, her voice steady but quieter than before. "This isn't something I ever planned. Not with someone like you." Her words were honest, and I could feel the weight in them. They weren't meant to push me away. They were confessions, truths she couldn't keep tucked inside anymore. I didn't plan it either, I admitted. My thumb brushed against her hand again, slow, gentle. But sometimes you don't need a plan to know when something feels right. For a moment, her eyes searched mine, looking for something, doubt, maybe, or recklessness. But what she found instead was sincerity, and I could see the tension in her shoulders melt just a little. She smiled then, a quiet, genuine curve of her lips that deepened the faint lines at their corners. It wasn't the practiced smile she gave customers or the playful smirk she'd flashed me earlier in the night. It was something more private, something softer, like a door opening just enough to let me glimpse the person inside. "You're dangerous," she whispered, though this time it sounded almost affectionate. I laughed under my breath, shaking my head. "I think you've got that backward." Her laugh followed mine, light and unforced. It drifted into the still air of the empty bar and seemed to hang there, golden and fragile. She let her head tilt slightly, her long black hair slipping over her shoulder as she studied me. The intensity in her gaze had quieted now, replaced with warmth, an acceptance of the connection we had stumbled into together. The jukebox, still humming faintly in the background, shifted to a slower song, the kind that seemed made for late hours and unspoken feelings. She glanced toward it, then back at me, and with a small sigh, she slid out of the booth. For a second, I thought the spell had broken, but then she extended her hand toward me, her eyes steady, inviting. I stood, letting her guide me toward the center of the empty bar floor. There, between the scattered stools and the soft glow of the hanging lights, she placed her hand lightly on my shoulder. My own found its way to her waist, tentative at first, then settling as she leaned closer. We didn't say a word. We just swayed slowly, following the rhythm of the song, the world beyond those locked doors fading away. Her cheek brushed against mine once, her breath warm, and I closed my eyes, letting the moment sink deep into me. It wasn't about the future or the rules or the risks. It was about now, the warmth of her hand, the steadiness of her heartbeat, the way two lives had collided in a place neither of us expected. And as the song played on, I realized I didn't want the night to end. Not yet. Maybe not ever.